said that I felt like God had challenged me to was growing up. And more specifically, not just growing up like becoming a baby to being an adult. I mean that I step away from the things I used to struggle with as far as more spiritually, more of an adolescent period. A period where I wasn't a little baby, I wasn't a child, I wasn't doing the silly little stupid stuff I'd always done. I kind of come out of that, but that instead of being a consumer, that I would embrace the idea of being a contributor. That if God gave me talent or gifts or abilities or anything that God gave me, that there's a place He wants to use that. It's not how do I use that to further my life, it's where do I look to be able to plug that in and contribute. How do I take what God's given me in my life and plug that into where it's useful? Because I think that's the biggest gap I see between an adolescence period of people into becoming an adult. They grow out of the consumer into the contributor. I think that kind of spiritually would wrap up a little bit more of what it's kind of the I want what I want when I want it phase of life. And this week I started looking a little deeper into that because for you guys that know me, you'll know that if I can see it, if I can get an idea of what something looks like, I have a lot better chance of getting it. And I think it's really easy. Oh, by the way, before I go any further, tonight may be one of those nights. We don't want anybody to get bucked off. We'll agree to that. However, if somebody gets bucked off, I don't want to miss it. So if it looks like it's about to go south, you guys give me a little hypothetically. Like I said, we don't want anybody to get bucked off. I'm not saying that. I just don't want to piss it after. And now I have to go back to talking about how I'm supposed to be an adult. So you start looking at what it means to grow up, what it means to be an adult, and one of the things that I've started looking at is how do you expect people to grow up? If there's a system that helps people advance, if there's a way that you can help a child with the best leg up possible, what does that look like? And spiritually, we can start applying that to ourselves spiritually. We can look at people physically, and the things that work for them physically, typically there's correlation to spiritual. You'll understand better here in a second. Fatherhood.org says the following about people raised in fatherless homes. So it's kids raised in a home, not just where there is no father, but where there's not an active father, where there's not a father that's engaged in the home. It says that they're 4 times more likely to end up in poverty, struggle with behavior problems and emotional battles. 1/5 of incarcerated inmates right now that were surveyed, only 1/5 of them grew up in a house that had an active father in it. There's a higher teen pregnancy rate, more likely to commit child abuse, higher drug and alcohol abuse rate, more childhood obesity, education was more of a struggle. And so you start looking at that, and the logical conclusion you could come up with is that if a child's going to grow up and have the best chance of success, they would need a father. But I start peeling it back a little bit further. I start looking a little more than that. And I think it's deeper than that. I think it goes further than that. I think when you start looking at why they need fathers, I think what you're left with is that people don't just need dads. Because I know that the job that my wife does with our kids is incredible. What kids need more than a father is kids need order. When there's an established order, when there's an established operating system that is consistent, and the way that works is a father figure and a mother figure and the dynamic that creates. It's not that kids can't make it without a dad. And so what typically happens is when there's not a dad in the home, the order gets out of whack. I know for you moms that have raised kids, you'll agree with me, is that little boys get to a certain age and mom goes from being mommy to annoying. And it's hard on moms. Moms are like, why don't you just do what I say? And little boys are just leave me alone. I'm a grown up. Now, I need some socks. You know, there's this like in-between period. There's this in-between phase where, okay, you're not an adult yet, but you're not a little kid anymore. And what does that look like? And it's because there's a lack of balance. And that, in my mind, is where a father steps in and they take that phase, and all of a sudden the role that the mom plays is now changed, and we'll get to it. Stick with me. You open the Bible to verse 1, page 1. The very first thing when you open the Bible that it begins to discuss, the first thing it addresses, it doesn't address sin, it doesn't address failure, it doesn't address families, it doesn't address Jesus, it doesn't address all these things that we eventually as church get to. The first thing the Bible addresses is order. Page 1, verse 1 says this. In Genesis 1, it says, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty, and darkness was over the surface of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. What it means is there was just chaos. There was just nothing. There was no definition. There was no lines. There was no borders. There was nothing. It was just blank. And it says, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God said the light was good. And he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day and the dark night, and the evening and the morning and the first day. What he says is this, is the first thing we've got to do is establish some order. If we can establish order, it's a system that makes everything run better. For you guys that have horses, one of the things that you'll probably know is this. Most lameness issues in horses start because their feet are not balanced. You know, you would think that it wouldn't make that big of a difference, but if a horse is not shod correctly, if they don't hit correctly, if they're not level, what happens is it creates soreness, and then the way they move, they become imbalanced. And because they're imbalanced, they start getting sore, and then they start protecting that sore joint, they start getting sore somewhere else, and barrel racers have to get everything injected. I'm just kidding. No, but okay, disregard, okay. Too far, okay, I'll back up. But if you can create balance from the feet, what it generally lends itself to is the horse becomes more sound overall. And so I think the same way in our lives, if the church is supposed to create healthy families, if we're supposed to have healthy families and healthy people and give people the best opportunity to grow up and have a healthy, balanced life, then I think the first thing we need to do is look at the order that God's put into place. Especially nowadays, because I believe fathers are under attack in this culture. I believe dads and men are told that you're supposed to calm down and be more gentle and not be so rough and not be men and all the things that go along with that. 1 Corinthians 11:3 says this. It says, but I want you to understand that the head of every man is Christ. The head of the wife is her husband, and the head of Christ is God. Here's what's basically being said there. God is setting an order for the family in place. It goes God the Father, God the Son, the husband, the wife, the children. That tends to do one of two things to people. People either go, yep, that's kind of how we are, or whoa, wait a minute. You don't understand. I married a child. He could not possibly run this family. You don't know my husband. He's an idiot. One of the things as this church moves forward that I want to warn everybody is that this is going to be a place where we're not going to celebrate men dodging their responsibilities of being men. And one of the ways you see them dodging their responsibilities of being men is they get really, really, I gotta be careful how I say this here, maybe a little more touchy-feely than men were created to be. Well, I just don't want to offend anybody. Well, I just don't want to say that. I just don't feel like that's my place. Nobody, I hope, in this church will ever congratulate a man for being anything less than a man. And if you don't know what that looks like, that's okay. That's where we're going. We'll get it figured out. But that doesn't mean that you have to roll over and lay on your back and let somebody else take the responsibilities God has given you. To the woman he said, I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing. This is Genesis 3:6. I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing. In pain you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. Where on earth would somebody get the nerve to write that? If you were to announce, okay, I've got a new book coming out. I'm an author, and I'm going to release this book, and it is going to say, and he shall rule over you. Whoever wrote that book would be called a bigot, a misogynistic, chauvinistic, hateful. But it's in the Bible. It's right there in the Bible. And what we have a tendency to do is we read that, guys. We love that. That we love. We read that, we're like, hear that, honey? Did you get that? Hey, preacher, could you repeat that one more time? I'm afraid my wife might have dozed. I want to make sure she gets that part. But we get to the point where we get to accept the Bible, and I don't just mean the parts that we like, but I mean contextually, look at what it's really saying, and we have the choice. We can either accept what it says, or we can kind of, I don't really like that. And we get an idea of, well, the Bible, I don't know if that really fits anymore. I don't know if I really like that. And all of a sudden, truth becomes relevant. Truth becomes something we either take or leave, but there it is right there. So if it's a healthy family, if we're going to look at what healthy families and healthy individuals look like, there's an order. And if that's the order that God has set in place. And here's the funny thing is that the whole family idea is God's invention anyway. God is the one that invented families. God's the one that put it into place. Why? I don't know why we argue with him about this stuff. We love the idea of families, but we're going to change it. God's going, this is all my idea anyway. So why wouldn't we look at how he said to run it? If we look at how he said to run it, then all of a sudden, the men are going to be better at being men, the women are going to be better at being women, the children are going to be better at being children, or the whole family dynamic becomes healthier. So if that's the case, I want to look at the head of the family. And for all the men, they're like, here we go. It's not men. Well, wait a minute. Hold on, that thing's backwards. The Bible says that the husband is right here, the wife right here, the children right here, and the lines of authority. And you go, wait a minute, then doesn't that mean the husband's the head of the family? If we as guys, you hear that, honey, you're supposed to submit to me, but we forget what the Bible said about Christ as the head of the man. If you haven't got the part down where as husbands, if you haven't got the part down where you're completely submitted to God, living for God in the way that He said to do it, forget the part about where your wife's supposed to do the same thing. Scrap that part. If you haven't got the part where you're supposed to be living for God and doing it the way He said to do it, then how dare you get excited about the fact that, hey, honey, I need my socks, my clean clothes, and I need breakfast. There's no room for that. If we get to the part where we say, okay, God is the head of the house, and we submit to what God says, then what that means is that we become better husbands, not worse. We don't become chauvinistic jerks. Ephesians 5:25 says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church, as He gave Himself up for her. Here's the rough part, guys, bad news, is that nowhere in the Bible does it say, wives, love your husbands. It said, husbands, love your wives. That's what we're instructed to do. And not just love them, but it says, love your wife as Christ loved the church. And here's the scary part about that. What did Christ do for the church? He died for it. So this whole head of the house thing started to take on a whole new direction. All of a sudden, we're like, is it that way? I was just heading out. We started really good, and then we took this big left turn, and now I'm not sure if I like where we're going, because we like being the head of the house as it pertains to we get the remote. But then now it's telling us we have to be submitted to God. And if we're not submitted to God, then the whole order's out of place anyway. Why wouldn't we hand it to your wife to run? Because there's things she's great at running. There's things in the house that Lacey is so much better than me at. And so the way that I choose to be the head of the house is, babe, what do I do here? How do I do this? You take, this is yours, this is your area. I'm not going to tell you how to do it. You tell me how to do it. And the reason I can do that is I've already practiced by being submitted to God. Something I'm already really familiar with. I can go to the Bible, and if I read something that steps on my toes, I go, okay, you're right, I'm sorry. And that same familiar submission that I have with God, there are times that I can look at my wife and go, I don't understand that. Well, you do that. You tell me how to do that. It would be so much easier if we just got to crack the whip. It probably would be, actually. Take care of your kids and their needs. This is husbands and wives. 1 Timothy 5:8 says, but if anyone, man or woman, does not provide for his relatives, and especially for the members of his household, he is denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. So what that means is that I'm going to have places that I am asked to provide for my family. My wife is going to have places where she's asked to provide for the family. There are things that we do as a team, and through that we create balance. Here we go back to balancing, and there's an order that God has set in place, and my kids get to see how my wife and I work together, and that our number one priority in the house is peace. Our very number one priority is peace. We will not sacrifice peace at the sake of an argument. Right or wrong. Right or wrong doesn't matter. And so the kids see that, and all of a sudden it becomes something that they value, and it's through that relationship provided for our family. Men, back to you. Colossians 3:21 says, fathers, do not provoke your children lest they become discouraged. Don't be a jerk to your kids. Dads. Ephesians 6:4 says, fathers, do not provoke your children to anger. Bring them up in the discipline and the instruction of the Lord, because like those statistics say, people, without an active father in the home, the chances of life being all that it can be are greatly diminished. Right here. Bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. So here's the thing, parents. We're asked to raise our kids in a way that they know what living for God looks like. They're supposed to have a godly example. My kids, my little boy right now, my little girl, when she gets to that point, she should be able to look at me and say, that is what somebody who's living for God should look like. That's a big responsibility. So here we're asked to submit to God, be the head of our household, physically, spiritually, spiritual provider in our household. We're asked to love our wives, provide for our families, and help raise our children. And that's great. But here's the problem, is that men do not learn audibly. We learn visually. If you can show us a picture of it, we'll get it. If you tell us something, probably not going to get it. live in Oregon, and one of the things I know that for some reason people in this state really value is running. I will maybe never understand it, but it's big here. They said that it is not humanly possible. A human is not built to run a mile in less than 4 minutes. It cannot be done. It was just the accepted idea that it was impossible to run a sub 4-minute mile until 1954 when Roger Bannister did it. And everybody in the world was exposed to the idea it is possible to run a sub 4-minute mile. Well, then 2 months later, 2 people did it. It took all the way until 1954 for one person to do it, and only just a few months for the second person to do it. Just under 10 years later, a high schooler did it. How is that possible? Did it become that the mile got shorter? It was that people went, it can be done. There's now a higher standard. All of a sudden, I thought this was as good as we could do. Well, now this is as good as we can do. Men learn visually. We bring things in visually. We understand visually. That's why the people that invent things get paid all the money, and the people that recreate it get paid nothing. The magic is the difficulty in doing it once, because once we've seen it done, it's so much easier to do it again. So here we go back to what we're asked to do. We're asked to submit to God, be the head of our households, physically, spiritually, love our wives, provide for our families, help raise our children, and I'm going to bet this. I'm going to bet that there are men that in this church that go, that's all great, but I'm going to tell you, I don't know how to do that. I don't really get that. I mean, yeah, it's a great idea. Do I want to live for God? Sure. Do I want to be the person that God's asked me to be? Sure, but I'm going to tell you, I don't know what that looks like. I'm not sure how to do that in my house. I'm not sure how to do that for my kids. I'm a little lost on some of this. And this is a perfect opportunity, and this is what generally happens, is that, not generally, that's not fair. Here's what can happen, is that some guy is married to a woman who is sick and tired of him being a child, and she goes, well, let me just explain it to you. You can start by doing the dishes maybe they do themselves, you do the floor vacuums itself, and all of a sudden the help that people intend to be, it's not a help. Because like I said, we don't learn audibly, we learn visually. This is a perfect opportunity, ladies, for you to tear your husband in half and go, yeah, you don't do it right, and you don't know what it's like, and if you just or if you were just more like so-and-so. And in the guy's defense, I'm sure that's not, I know that's not everybody, I know generally that's not the case, but in the guy's defense, the guy's going, well, that's great, if I had an idea of what it looked like, I could probably do it. Show me what it looks like and I can do it. God called me to be a pastor, and all I'd ever done really is rodeo. I mean, I've been around it, but my whole life had looked like this, and this is what I wanted my life to be, and this is where I wanted my life to go, and like I talked about last week, it just never, for years I didn't really understand it, and I didn't understand why I wasn't going the way that I thought it was going to go. Well, then I got to the place where God said, can you set this down, and I'd like for you to pick this up. This is the life that I actually built you to do. I actually created you to do a job, and this is it. I know that this is where you've been, but this is where I need you to be. And here's the thing I understand is that we're going to have guys that come into this church. A lot of them are probably going to be on Monday night. They walk in, and their whole life has been this, and they've lived their life a certain way, or they've lived years living like this. And what we're asking them to do, let's not undervalue what we're asking them to do. We're asking them to admit that everything that they, basically, in their minds, everything they've done up until this point was wrong, and that they have to set that down and pick up what God was saying. And the hard part about that, guys, is that what's really hard for us to do, first of all, is admit we're wrong. I'm there. But second of all, to admit somebody else is right. Okay, I was wrong, I messed it up, I need to live more like that guy. That's a stretch for people. That's a stretch for men. I mean, I realize that what we're asking is huge. So what we try to do is we try to set a life here and be authentic to who God's called us to be, and we try to be the person that God's called us to be. And when people walk in, that the environment is very realistic. That's why it makes me sick. I spent months or years speaking in churches that didn't look like this one, and I would tell you, I would walk in and I thought, man, if I brought my rodeo buddies here, they would turn around and run, because there's nothing there being portrayed that they can attach to. So God asked me to set down the life that I had pursued and be willing to pick up the life He'd asked me to pursue and that He'd actually built me to do. And here's what helped me immensely, is that I was raised under the tutelage, so to speak, of my dad and my uncle and my grandpa. It was three people that had done basically what God was calling me to be and live basically the way that they had. Now granted, what I do is going to look different. But I could look at my uncle and I could look at the church he's got and go, well, if that's what being a pastor is like, I could probably do something like that. And over a period of time, God began to develop this idea of what this church could look like. But it was because I had somebody I could look at and go, that guy, like that. I get that. If God would have called me to be a pastor, I'd gone, okay, I don't have a clue what that looks like. And I walk into the first church and he's got a suit and tie, I'd go, I think he must have not heard God right. You know, I'm almost sure of it now. Now that I think about it, I think he said, go to the pasture. things that you do as people, things that we all do, like, we're gonna, I don't think I got that right. But here we go again, we learn visually, and because I had someone in my life that I could look at, I could say that. If it looks like that, that's okay, I can do it. Then all of a sudden, God was able to start creating this idea in my mind. John 5:19 through 20. Before I read this, I want to tell you that, guys, we're going to generally fall into one or two categories. We're generally going to be one of two things. We're either going to be the guy that God's gotten a hold of, and we're growing, and we're doing the things He's asked us to do, and we're getting an idea of what our life is going to look like, and we're kind of getting the hang of it. And we like who God's called us to be, because here's the secret, is that God usually doesn't ask us to lay down our entire life and pick up an entirely new one. Generally, what He asks us to do is just take this life and kind of make some adjustments. That's really the truth of it. I mean, really, when people walk in, very seldom is God going to go, okay, welcome to church, you need to move to Africa. Generally, He'll start with something really simple and really easy to do. And if that's the case, then you're going to be the guy that's kind of getting those things right. The first category. Second category will be guys that walk in and they're like, hey, I know that what I'm doing maybe isn't exactly how it's supposed to be. I know that where I'm at isn't where I want to be, but I don't really know what it looks like to move forward. I mean, I want to live for God, and I hear people say stuff in church, and I get it, and that's kind of what I want, but I don't know what that looks like. I don't know what it looks like to be a Christian dad. I don't know what it looks like to be a Christian husband or a leader. I don't know what that looks like. John 5:19 through 20 says, Jesus gave him this answer, I tell you the truth, the Son can do nothing by himself. He can only do what he sees the Father doing, because whatever the Father does, the Son also does. For the Father loves the Son and shows him all that he does. What a great thought. There it is right there. I mean, that exactly explains what I'm talking about, is that if people are going to get it, if we're going to establish the order in the homes, if we're going to ask men to be men, and we're going to ask women to be women and take on the roles that God's given all of us, and through that, we're going to submit to God. If we're going to do that, we're going to have people in this church that when they walk in, they can point to somebody in this church, whoever it is, and go, I remember how that guy used to be. You know, I remember that guy, and if that guy can do it, I can do it. There's a reason that we value what God's doing with the men in the church. For you guys that don't know, our numbers are absolutely off the charts. For you guys that don't know, we've got around 60% men in this church, and that is unheard of. We tell people that, they're like, I don't think you're counting quite right. And we've almost adopted this idea that in the U.S. that church is for women. That this is kind of a girly thing. It's kind of something the women do. They go to church on Sunday, that's good, but we're going to go fishing. And as long as that's the case, we're never going to be able to fully utilize, that's a good use of that word. We're never going to be able to fully utilize the family unit in the way that God created it. We're going to continually not understand why our kids graduate high school and then fall out of church. We won't ever understand why, no matter how hard we try, our kids just seem to not get it. Or why it is that we have to keep taking on the roles in this house that we'd really like for our husbands to take on. If we don't completely grab the idea that God loves men, and God loves women, and God loves kids, and there's an order that they all play, and if we'll all play those roles correctly, we'll be better. You guys didn't give me a warning up there. Almost half it. Can we just take a time out here? No. If we can get to the place where we understand that God has called men to be men, not apologize for it, not back up, not try to domesticate men to the point that they're useless, but embrace what God created men to be, not what men have created men to be, then what we're going to be is we're going to be better fathers, we're going to be better husbands. There's a reason that our church values. We had a baptism service last week, and 8 out of the 10 people who got baptized were men. Woo! It's not because we're devaluing women, it's because we love what God has asked the family to be. that if the man can stand up and say, you know, I'm going to do this, I'm maybe not exactly comfortable with all this, but I'm going to do it, the doors that opens for the family. You know, the kids see the dad do it, and they go, well, hey, maybe, you know, maybe I'm not too cool for this after all. Second of all is this, and I think maybe this is the most important one, is that when men walk into this church, the fact is God's got a call on all of our lives. I mean, we say things like, well, God's got a call in your life, generally if we feel like somebody's going to be called into ministry. But the fact is, God, it says that God's not willing that any should perish. God wants everybody that walks in those doors to find a place right here in church that they can feel at home. And if we're going to do that, there's got to be men in this church that go, that's me. That's me. The reason that we let men be the greeters is because when men show up, we want them to know that they're not going to be too masculine for this church. That you're never going to outman the people that are in this church. You're never going to be more hairy-legged than the people that are already here. And the reason that's important is when they walk in, they go, well, hey, if they're doing it, I can do it. Because we learn visually. So we're going to be one of two things. We're either going to be the men that walk in and go, you know, I'm not sure exactly how to do that yet, or we're going to be the men that are going, you watch me. Paul takes on the attitude of a dad. He says this, he said, follow me as I follow Christ. And I don't want to skip that. It doesn't say follow me because I'm perfect. Here's a great example, guys, of stepping into the responsibility God's called us to. He didn't say, follow me because I'm perfect. And that's what guys usually will hide behind. It, like, well, I mean, don't watch me. There's still some stuff. What he said was, follow me as I follow Christ. People will connect to your struggles before they connect to your successes. If you can show the people that where you're struggling, if you can be transparent and just be honest, and you say, you know what, if you'll do what I'm doing, I'll figure it out. I'm still working my way through this. God has been dealing with me about some stuff, but if you'll stick with me, we'll figure it out together. The kind of role that you're asked to play as a dad, spiritually, you begin to take that kind of a role here. If we can do that, the order of us being submitted to God begins to line out, and all of a sudden you get every link in the chain lined up, and the family unit becomes more effective. And when kids walk in that don't have a healthy home, and man, I could go the rest of the night on this one, but if kids walk in that don't have a healthy home, what better opportunity do we have than to just put it on display right here? That when kids walk in and maybe what they've seen at home isn't exactly right, or maybe they walk in and they're kind of confused, or I'm going to tell you another one that we undervalue, when kids walk in and they're scared of men. I was a youth pastor for a few years, and you wouldn't believe how common that is. You would not believe how common it is for kids to be afraid of men for whatever reason. And it's not just a few. I mean, it is high percentage numbers for different areas or whatever that kids have to be scared of men. Some sort of abuse, some sort of example of men not being the person they're supposed to be, and they get this idea that men are the enemy. And that we have an opportunity here as a church that men can come in and be the men that God's called them to be, and that we get to play the role of fathers to kids that maybe don't have it. That the family unit of people being submitted to God and submitted to each other, that people can walk in and know what healthy feels like. I'm going to tell you, I've heard story after story after story of people who said, you know, I walked away from God and I could never get away from the fact that I hadn't experienced a church when I was a kid. People never forget what healthy feels like. People will never completely walk away or completely forget what healthy feels like. And if they can come here and have that sort of an experience, it's something that will go with them wherever they go. I've got a challenge, and I did this yesterday, and I'm going to do it again. There's something significant about the idea of standing up, and everybody goes, ooh. I'm going to talk to the men for just a second. We're almost done. There's a fight that goes on inside of us. I just don't want to do that. No, I'm good. But I'm gonna ask this: is that category one, which is, you know, I want to do that. I want to learn how to live for God. I want to know what healthy looks like. I want, when my kids come into the house, that they know what healthy looks like. I want to know what it feels like to be a healthy husband and a dad and a healthy son. I want to know what that looks like. And I believe that the Bible's right, and I believe that I gave my heart to God, but I'm going to be honest, I just don't completely know what that looks like. That's a hard thing to admit because we get to a certain age where we're just expected to know it. We reach a certain number and we're just expected that we're going to know it, and if we're past that, the struggle is, well, I'm supposed to already know that. I think I'm supposed to have that figured out. Here's what I want to challenge you with, and I'm not asking anybody to come to the front or anything like that, but here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask that we just have a little moment of transparency here. Talking to the men here for a second, if you walked in and you feel like that's where you're at, yeah, I'm going to live for God, but I'm not sure exactly what that looks like. Maybe I'm supposed to, maybe I'm not, but I don't know exactly how to do all that just yet. I'm going to ask you here in the presence of family, we're all family here, if you'd stand up. Guys that are still seated, talking to you now, here's what I'm going to ask, is that there are men here that have just made a huge step. I remember being this age, and I remember I don't want to do that. I'm not ready to commit to that yet. Guys that are standing up, I want you to watch, because here's what I'm going to ask. Guys, if that's a responsibility that you're willing to take on, if you can say, you know, I'm not saying I'm perfect, I'm not saying I got it all figured out, but I feel like I know who God's called me to be, and I'm getting it more right than wrong. And if you'll follow me, I'll do the best I can to express what that looks like. When you come to church, if you don't know what it looks like, you watch me and I'll do the best I can. If that's you guys, if you feel like that's the category you fall in, I'm going to ask you to stand up. You guys want to know why we're building a church. If you guys want to know why we're jumping in way over our heads, we've got to raise $250,000 and all the stuff that we're talking about in the building fund. If you guys want to understand why we're doing that, here's why. This may be the only place in the Pacific Northwest that can say what we're saying right here. I need an example, I'll be an example. It's valuable to me, it's valuable, and I'm going to pray for the guys that are standing right now. And ladies, I'm going to ask that you pray with us. Dear Lord Jesus, God, I know we get it wrong, and I know that we shy away from it, from bad examples. I know there are times that we see it wrong, and so we decide not to do it at all. But God, tonight, that we, as men who have said we need what you've got, God, I don't know exactly what that looks like, but we want to be better. If you'll just give us an example, if you'll just set a standard, we'll achieve it. If you'll just tell us where to go, we'll go. God, I don't want to undervalue what the guys have said today by standing up tonight. God, I know that's not easy. I know that that's a lump in your throat kind of moment, but God, I know that you'll honor it. God, for the men that stood up and said, we'll be an example. You just follow me and we'll get there. God, that you would give them a vision of what that looks like, that you'd help them see what it looks like in their lives. God, even for them, that you help them identify with people that are going the direction they need to go. God, I fear that we have gotten the wrong idea of what a Christian man looks like in this nation. God, that nationally we've adopted the idea that men are soft and disingenuous and they're not authentic and they put on a plastic face and they're hypocritical. God, I believe with all my heart, if you look around the room today at the men that are in this room, that's what Christian men look like. And God, that we're able to embrace that and we'll be better fathers and better husbands and better men because of it. Ben, you can go ahead and sit down. I'm going to ask everybody to keep your heads bowed and your eyes closed for just a second. Here's what I know. I know that it starts with this. It starts, the order of what we're asked to do starts with this, is that we accept God as the king of what we're supposed to be. The very first step, it's like putting the right button in the right hole on your shirt. The thing that just lines everything else up. And I'm going to bet there were people that walked in tonight that needed order in their life. They needed order. It feels like things are chaotic. They can't figure out which way's up. They can't figure out why things aren't going the way they're supposed to. Everything just feels confusing. And tonight, the order that God has for you needs to be established. I'm going to pray, and I'm going to ask everybody to repeat after me. Dear Lord Jesus, thank you for loving me. Thank you for sending your Son to die on a cross so that I could be forgiven. Nobody looking around, and I'm not going to ask anybody to stand up or come to the front on this one, but here's what I'm going to ask. If you came tonight and you're not exactly sure where you stand with God, Maybe once upon a time you made a decision and it didn't stick, or maybe you've never made a decision, and tonight you need that order to begin. You need God to help establish that order that He's placed here for us to learn from and to be better. We need to be better at who we are. And tonight, if you ask Jesus to come into your life, nobody looking around, if you just raise your hand. Once it's up, you put it back down. Thank you. You can look up. One of the things I know about men, Jed, he comes in the living room and he goes, Dad, I want to show you something. I'm like, okay, he goes, I'm going to need my cape first. You pretty much guarantee he's been watching Superman. We like being challenged. We like being part of something bigger. And I just to touch on it, it's not what tonight's about, but just to touch on it for a second, we've got a really big financial goal that I believe with all of my heart it's going to be the thing that sets the tone for Central Oregon. I don't think we're going to be a part of Central Oregon. I think we get to be a part of changing Central Oregon. We have a place where people get to come and we get to be who we are. We get to be Christians that look like us. Who would have thought? So if that's something that you want to be a part of, we're asking that the Cornerstones, we're going to do some more stuff. We've got some other ideas and some things that we're going to go. But to begin with, what we're asking is that 20 people will take on $5,000. If we can get to that point, it's downhill from there. We've still got a lot to go, but we're challenging men or families or women or people that go, you know what, that's something I can do. We've got about 2 months to come up with it. It doesn't have to be right now. But if that's something you feel like that you'd like to take on, if that's one of the goals that you think you'd like to take on, I'm going to ask you to visit Lacey after church, and she's the one to organize and all that. If you can't do 5,000, that's okay. I'm just kidding. Joel Osteen said this when he got ready to buy the Staples Center where they're going to have church. He said, the good news, God provided all the money, and people cheered, and he goes, the bad news is still in your pockets. But that's kind of where we're at. But one of the things I know about fundraising, and I hate that word because it's always like a sales pitch, and I don't feel that way. I feel like if God wanted us to just have a bag of money, He'd have given it to us. But if we get to build it, if we get to be a part of building it, I don't feel one bit apologetic. I'm not asking you to pay my bills. I'm good. What I'm asking us to do is that we all get to invest. The Bible says where your treasures are, there will your heart be also. We get an opportunity for a lot of people to pour their hearts into what God's building there. What a great opportunity. If that's the case, I don't have to be apologetic. I can be excited. When that thing's built, do you realize how many people's blood, sweat, and tears are going to be poured into it? It's going to be home. It's going to be home for people. So I'm going to pray, and we're going to take up the offering. If you want what you're giving to go towards the building fund, this is above and beyond the tithe towards the building fund. If you'll just earmark it, we'll make sure it goes where it's supposed to go.